Greetings acquisition pros and welcome to the AFMC PK 5-minute fix video on the basics of forward pricing rate agreements. Before we dive into details, it's important for us to take a look at indirect costs in a broader context. In a DCMA memo from May 2011, the director at the time noted how indirect costs accounted for over 50% of MDAP dollars spent. Let that sink in for a minute. In essence, over half of the proposed costs on any contract are related to multiple contracts, not just the current award, adding significant complexity to the instant contract negotiation. There is good news, however. The government isn't completely helpless when it comes to negotiating indirect costs on a contract. Fortunately, our counterparts at DCMA, and more specifically the cognizant ACO, work tirelessly to negotiate the forward pricing rates associated with those indirect costs for many major defense contractors. Some of these rates include, for example, material overhead, labor and manufacturing overhead, and G&A, just to name a few. Let's look at how and when forward pricing rate tools are applicable to your acquisition, and secondly, how you go about utilizing them in the course of conducting negotiations. In accordance with FAR 15407-3A, when certified cost or pricing data is required, offerors are required to describe any applicable forward pricing rate agreements, or FPRAs, that apply to their proposal. This FPRA is the result of the negotiations mentioned earlier between the ACO and the contractor. Subparagraph B of the same subdivision in the FAR goes on to compel contracting officers to use those FPRA rates, unless they seek a waiver, for any contract action with the contractor during the period covered by the agreement. So you might ask, what triggers DCMA to seek an FPRA with a contractor? Well, according to FAR 42-1701A, an FPRA can be requested by the PCO, or can be requested by the contractor, or initiated by the ACO. The DCMA Manual 2201-01, entitled Forward Pricing Rates, provides further guidance requiring establishment of an FPRA whenever a cost monitoring program is required per DFARS PGI. That requirement is tripped by a threshold when the projected sales to the government during the next contractor fiscal year exceeds $200 million. Think of the FPRA in terms of a contract. In the rate agreement realm, the contractor's proposal is called a forward pricing rate proposal, or FPRP. The government objective is the forward pricing rate recommendation, or the FPRR, developed by the ACO. Much like pricing a contract action, the path towards an FPRA is very similar. The contractor submits the FPRP to the ACO, who, with audit help from DCAA and input from interested contracting offices, will analyze the proposal and develop the FPRR. Then the parties will engage in fact-finding as needed, conduct negotiations leading hopefully to an FPRA. You may have noticed that we didn't mention any requirement for the contractor to certify cost of pricing data for the FPRA. Well, does TINA apply? The answer here is no. Remember, the FPRA is an agreement that can be updated or dissolved as circumstances dictate. FAR 15407-3C tells us that when an FPRA is used to price a contract action that requires certifying, that certificate supporting the contract action shall also cover the data supplied to support the FPRA. So ultimately, the contractor is accountable for the data, just not at the time of the FPRA. So you might ask, how long is the agreement good for? FAR 42-1701 has a ton of great information regarding the terms of the agreement, to include expiration and conditions that would require renegotiation of the FPRA. It also lays out provisions giving the ACO the ability to negotiate continuous updates to the FPRA. Thus, the cycle doesn't have to start from scratch each time there are conditions that affect the agreement's validity. And ultimately, it outlines the option for either party to unilaterally cancel the agreement. Lastly, if there is no FPRA in place, you will need to conduct your own analysis in order to come up with the indirect rate objectives. In that event, you may refer to the current FPRR in order to establish a baseline for rate negotiations. However, if no FPRR exists, the cognizant ACO should provide you with the best information available at the time to support your objective. You can also request the contractor's FPRP, again if it's available, as cost of pricing data. In either case, seek any and all data necessary to support your negotiation objectives. Thanks for viewing this AFMCPK 5-minute fix video on forward pricing rate agreements. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to check out the references mentioned during this presentation as listed on the screen.